A to the K.
to the K.
To the K.
Hello, one and all. Welcome to the A to the K Wrestling Show, where joining us today is acclaimed writer, director, and producer of titles such as Coming to America, The Nutty Professor, and of course, the greatest wrestling documentary of all time, Beyond the Mat, the one and only Barry Blaustein. Barry, thanks for joining us. How are you?
Thank you. Thanks for those kind words.
Awesome.
So I figured we'd start off if we could. Obviously, the majority of our interview, given that we are a wrestling-based show, will be us focusing on Beyond the Mat. But I'd like to start, if we could, by asking sort of how you got into the world of writing, and is it something you always wanted to do?
No, it's nothing. I still don't want to do it. It's too painful to write. I wanted to be something in show business, and they said, "Can you write?" And I said, "Sure, I can write." And because I learned very quickly, never say no to anything. The bar is not that high in Hollywood, and I had enough ability, and I figured if these people are succeeding, so can I.
Oh, awesome. Obviously, you got your start kind of writing for the Michael Douglas Show and obviously Saturday Night Live. What was it like writing in such a kind of, what I imagine is a fast-paced environment, especially for live audiences and things like that?
Well, it was such two different shows. The Mike Douglas Show was an afternoon talk show that had been on since I was born, practically. I remember watching with my grandmother after school. And so that dealt with an older audience, but it was good practice for me because everybody did that show. So I was not intimidated working around actors. And then Saturday Night Live was a totally different experience. So it was a wonderful experience. I mean, creatively, and it's just the pressure every week when you got to come up with something. You got to reinvent the wheel every single week.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I can only imagine.
So obviously you've worked a great deal with Eddie Murphy throughout his career. So I just wondered sort of how you first started to sort of collaborate and what it was like working with Eddie.
Well, I did all my work with Eddie, mostly with my partner David Sheffield and another guy named Bob Tischler, who was a producer on the show. What happened is, are you familiar with the show? You had featured cast members and cast members. There's the cast members, right, and then the featured cast members, which are like the rookies on the bench that never get into the game.
Right.
Yeah.
And Eddie was one of those, and the cast wasn't setting the world on fire, and we thought, why not try writing for this guy? And the minute he stepped on camera, it was like, whoa, he's got it. He's got, in the words of Paul Heyman, he's got it. And it was like, we started writing exclusively for him because his stuff, he made your stuff better. He elevated his stuff.
Yeah.
It's been
phenomenal talent.
40 years that I've been writing for him.
Wow,
it's crazy to consider that.
And I'm 52. That's the amazing thing.
Super early start in the business. Love it. Yeah, he's a phenomenal actor. You could see. Obviously, it's crazy that he was only one of the, like not an actual cast member. He was only one of the featured performers at the time. That's crazy to think. But as we kind of said, with us being a wrestling show, obviously Beyond the Mat is going to be the predominant focus of this. And at the start of the documentary, the first words that you kind of utter is, I don't know why I like it, I just always have. And so obviously, what's your first memory of pro wrestling?
Well, actually going to, I remember watching it on TV, but I don't remember anything. There was a wrestler named Skull Murphy. I think he was from Britain, actually. And he had a partner named Brute Bernard, and he was a bald guy, mean-looking guy, and he scared the hell out of me when I was like 5 years old. But I remember begging my dad to take me to a wrestling match. and my mother being very against it. She hated the fact that I had all these wrestling magazines with people with blood all over their face.
Yeah.
And my dad took me to a match, and it was very much like in the beginning of the movie. The wrestler looked gigantic, and then I saw him go into a car with where his wife was waiting for him, and I'm going, these are real people, because I was 8, so
yeah, of course, yeah.
I'm not this age going, these are real people. People. You mean he's not Roman Reigns all the time?
So obviously you have been a huge wrestling fan. Is it something you still watch today? Do you watch the current product?
I still watch it. I'm embarrassed and proud at the equal measures to say I still watch it. Some weeks I just tape it and watch. I'll fast forward through it and all that stuff. And I think it's better than it's ever been.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I mean, there's a lot of, if you like to read on the internet, there's so many people who like to complain about certain things, but it's I would dare say it's a very different product to what it was, but like you say, it is phenomenal now.
Right. I think the wrestlers are more athletic, the storytelling's better. It's just more enjoyable.
Yeah.
It's less cringeworthy. I used to say it was like when people would come in the room and I'd be watching wrestling, I'd quickly change it. It's like I was watching porno or something. And then whenever I just see, I like this. But I watch much more wrestling than porno. But,
I love it.
But I still watch it.
Awesome. That's so cool to know. Like the fact that you haven't, because I think a lot of people, especially, it became a massive sensation in like the late 90s, and everybody was watching it, and then it kind of goes through peaks and troughs of people kind of falling out of love with it and kind of maybe getting back into it or kind of outgrowing it and stuff. But yeah, I agree with you. It's kind of it's better because of it's less kind of cringe and it's less kind of silly, I suppose, than it was at times.
I remember when I was doing the movie, and when I started the movie, the WWE wasn't WWF.
Yeah.
Wasn't doing that well.
No.
And wrestling goes through trends where it's very popular and then times when it's not popular. And I got permission from Vince to film, and which I'm very appreciative of. And then while I was filming, wrestling started taking off.
Mm-hmm.
And there were various people in his company who didn't want me to film there anymore.
Yeah.
Because they said, well, we're taking off and we don't need it anymore. And I said, the difference, I would tell Vince, the difference between me and the other people that are now they're after you is they'll desert you the minute you're not popular anymore.
Mm.
I'll still be watching.
Yeah.
And that was always a very effective, I'd say strategy, but it was meant sincerely.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
That's absolutely fascinating. I think, I'll just get my kind of fanboying out of the way. Like, I absolutely love Beyond the Mat. I remember back in 1999 going to the local supermarket and like rushing over to try and get the VHS and pestering my dad to let me have it and stuff like that, and taking it home. And just, I love everything about the documentary. It is legitimately the best like wrestling documentary I've ever seen. And the thing that I was fascinated about the most is that you approached it with across the whole board. So we had people like Tony Jones and Mike Modest, who were just starting out in the business. You had, Terry Funk and Jake, who were coming to the end. And then obviously you had the likes of WWF and ECW. How did you decide to approach it in such a way? Like, was that always the plan to do the whole spectrum of wrestling?
Well, originally when I sold it, it was going to be follow young guys making it, trying to make it. But when I quickly realized is the young guys weren't as interesting because they didn't have the experience in the stories.
Yeah.
So I'd always been a big fan of Terry Funk and Jake Roberts, and I always enjoyed their work. And I'd met Terry Funk when I was on the Mike Douglas show. So I approached him, and then I was fascinated with Mick Foley. Mick Foley, I think, is one of the most fascinating people I've ever met. And he was then, when I met him, he was at ECW.
Mm-hmm.
And then he went to WWF and WW/E. And I didn't have an agreement with them to film him. I didn't have an agreement with WW with Vince at that time. So I couldn't use him in the documentary. And then a year later, I got the agreement with Vince. And I called Mick up. I said, "You're back in the documentary." And
Awesome.
I remember meeting with Vince at his home in Connecticut. And he was very interested in knowing what I thought of the wrestlers. And he had a whole roster, and he wanted me to tell exactly who I thought was going to make it, who did I like, who didn't thought I had potential in that. And they're about to relaunch The Rock again, which he said, he admitted they made a mistake. They just pushed him down people's throats. And I said, well, he's going to be a big name. I mean, now it's
yeah, of course. Yeah.
You really saw that. But I mentioned Mick Foley, and he goes, "Really, Mick Foley?" And I go, "He's a great talker, and he represents the fan. He's every kid who wanted to be a wrestler."
Yeah, definitely. So obviously you mentioned there with sort of speaking to Vince, and one of the things that we had certainly in this country, in the marketing, in the box art of the film, was that it was labeled as the documentary that Vince McMahon doesn't want you to see.
Yeah.
Now, I'm aware that's probably on some level a bit of marketing there, but is that something that happened? Was Vince sort of quite against it when the finished product was there, or?
Vince was upset because he didn't own a piece of the film, and
Right.
he didn't want Universal making money off characters he helped create.
Right. Yeah.
The advertising of it, this is the movie Vince McMahon doesn't want you to see, was not something I really wanted, and I actually asked them to try to change it, but that's the way they wanted to market it, because the film was more than that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. What was
the film that Vince wanted to own?
That's definitely the truer quote.
And I remember coming to England to promote the film.
Oh, nice. What did you make your time across the pond?
Yes, and I was on the morning show, the big morning show, and then I was in a horrible talk show on the radio. A guy who was mostly interviewing Terry, and it was obvious he hadn't seen the film, but he was like one of these guys who badmouths everything. Right. I know his name, and but besides that, it was great. He was so terrible, it was great. And I enjoyed him too.
Yeah.
And, love it. Yeah, hopefully we're on the we're not on the lower end of that spectrum for UK talk shows that
you guys are in charge of the talk.
So obviously being backstage in WWE, you kind of had almost like an all access thing. Also, seeing the documentary where you could go backstage and see everything. What was that experience like of being in Titan Tower and having full on access to Vince and the wrestlers?
Well, it was, I told all the wrestlers that if you don't want to be in it, I won't put you on camera.
Yeah.
And there were a group of wrestlers who didn't want to be in it. For the Undertaker was said, "I've made a lot of money being this guy. I don't want to blow my image by talking." And he was actually very polite and very much like him. Whenever I was shooting, it was, "Am I in the camera? Do you want me to move?" and all that. So there was always a locker room that I always was full of guys that were cool with me.
Yeah.
And then there was a locker room that I didn't go into. But I had enough access. I also spent about 2 years, not every day, but like once a month, once every 6 weeks, going on the road with them without cameras, because I was casting it. And I only had so much footage. And it was trying to find out who would be interesting, who wouldn't be interesting. And I forgot the point I was going to make. I've been hit in the head too many times. Too many chair shots. Well, you can figure out the rest. I just having a senior moment there. But it was. I know. I was about 2 years without cameras, and the reason why was for casting, and they were always wondering, and it was also to make them feel comfortable around me.
Yeah.
So when I showed up with cameras, it was like, oh, here he is again. Oh, this time he has cameras.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just meeting people saying, hi, how are you? I'm putting you on camera right now.
Yeah. So you kind of built up those relationships.
Yeah. And I think it truly pays off, because you can really see the sort of the care that you've put into it. You can really see how sort of well the documentary comes across because of it. One of the things I mentioned was how sort of Vince McMahon comes across in that. Like, a lot of people, especially in recent years, have had a lot of opinion about the man, but like something that I thought come across really well in your documentary was sort of how much love he had for the business. So I think, like you say, it was definitely worth building those relationships,
there was a moment in Sacramento when I was filming in California where it was a Monday Night Raw, and Steve Austin had just beaten the crap out of him. And they're taking apart the ring, and Vince is drinking a beer, and he goes, God, I love this business. And he had pure joy in his face. And I said, I want to capture that. We've got to, in the course of this film, capture how much you enjoy this.
Yeah, I think you truly do. To be fair, it's one of the most notable things for me about Vince was that the sheer joy that he had for the product, and for a man who'd been in the business for that long, it's brilliant to see.
Oh yeah, he loved it. He loved it. I remember in the beginning negotiating with WCW, and they were starting to do real well, and they were envisioning putting Vince out of business. And I went, you'll never put him out of business. You can't. He's like a horror. I don't want to compare it to a monster, because I don't think it's a monster. But in a horror movie that keeps coming back, you can knock him down, he'll come back.
Yeah. And like it certainly showed, as he came out on top at the end.
Yeah.
So obviously you also spent time in ECW with Paul Heyman.
Right.
And obviously it was a very different product at the time. I just wondered sort of how you found your experience with ECW and sort of, I suppose, the smaller, more tight-knit locker room that they had compared to the WWE and your experience there.
Yeah, ECW was very interesting. Terry Funk talked me into going. He says, you got to, I'll do a terrible Terry Funk impression. You got to go, man. You got to see these guys in Philadelphia. They're incredible. They do amazing stuff. Wait till you see it. It'll blow your mind. And I went there, and the crowd was great. There was an energy there. And the violence was so extreme. I know it would be interesting on film.
Yeah.
And the locker room was, except for 2 or 3 guys, very welcoming.
Yeah. It seems because it was such a smaller operation, I imagine it was much more intimate in that sense. Really, that it's more of a family feel. Maybe.
But it's hard. I was going to title the film trying to find Paulie, because Paul Heyman is the hardest person to pin down. And thank God for Tommy Dreamer, because he helped wrestle Paul in sometimes.
Yeah.
And Paul is an interesting guy. He's one of the most fascinating people I've ever met. I often said to him, "You could rule small countries. Why are you doing this?"
And we've always said he's a fantastic talker, so I could well believe that, to be fair.
Yeah. He's definitely got the mind for it, hasn't he? You can just see this, like, how even it's so funny, because as Anthony said, you could see, like, it was so jarring almost to see Vince, who's like the big kind of, owner, to see him like doing struts with Dude Love and stuff like that. But then you see a side of Paul that we kind of still see today on his promos, where you can tell that he's just got that creative. He's just such a creative guy. So yeah, it's fascinating.
I don't know, because I haven't seen the movie in a while, if this made the final cut or not. But there was a question I asked Paul, and I go, "What's the best thing about being Paul Heyman? What's the worst thing?" And he says, "The best thing is I'm living out my dreams. I have my own wrestling company. It's all I ever dreamed about." And I said, "What's the worst part?" And he goes, "Well, I'm 35 and I live with my parents."
Yeah. Yeah, he literally put everything into it, didn't he, to follow that
Really
dream.
good.
So you've definitely got to respect that. I think obviously in the documentary we got to see Droz, or Puke as he was going to be called at the time. Was it true that you were also considering maybe Edge at that time to put him in the movie?
That is true. I went to the WWE and they said, who do you think are up and coming stars that you're going to be pushing? And they said Droz, this guy that pukes, and Edge. But when I spoke to Edge, he seemed very hesitant to do it.
Right.
And I wish he had done it. But at that time, I think he didn't want to, he was afraid of maybe turning people off in Backstage.
Right, yeah, okay.
Interesting.
But it's the first time anyone's ever asked me that.
Carl doing his research there. Love it.
I didn't lie. I love the movie. I've been fascinated with this since 1999. So yeah.
So obviously you've mentioned a few times now about Terry Funk, who obviously you were a big fan of, but you seem to be sort of I've built quite a good relationship with in doing this documentary. So I just wanted to ask sort of what that experience was like, and sort of like how surreal it was to sort of meet him and work with him, and sort of how you found that relationship
with Terry.
Yeah.
And the question is, how did I find the relationship?
Yeah, because it's someone that you were a big fan of anyway, so it must have been quite surreal. So yeah, just sort of how that experience. What, like, did he live up to the person you thought he was? In a lot of ways.
Yeah, Terry's a great guy.
Yeah.
And I remember long talks we'd have about non-wrestling things.
Yeah.
Like marriage and raising kids and stuff like that. I mean, the bulk of our conversations were not about wrestling off camera.
Yeah. That's awesome to know that, like, obviously he's like, you get to know him as a person as well. It's fantastic.
Yeah, he was really interesting, Terry.
Yeah, you came across fantastic.
Tremendous respect for him as a person.
Yeah,
he's done so much for the business, hasn't he, over many years. But then to also, as you say, just be such a stand-up guy as well. Takes a lot. I think one of the more expected things to come out of the documentary was obviously Dennis Stamp, where obviously he almost became almost like a meme in himself of like, but I'm not booked, and like jumping on the trampoline and stuff. Did you get a chance to speak to kind of Dennis once the movie came out? Did he ever kind of get in touch with you to say like, holy hell, like my name's blown up?
No, but I heard from Terry, who at first he said Dennis didn't like the movie, but then everyone liked Dennis in the movie, and then he was proud to be in the movie. And he thought it was great to be in the movie.
That's awesome, because obviously, as Carl says, it's sort of it's built that level of fame for him, didn't it? So that's fantastic to know. Obviously, one of the other one of the key stories, I suppose, explored in the documentary was Jake the Snake, and obviously, thankfully, we sort of now see where he is with his getting help from DDP, and
Right.
And how well he's doing now. But I just wondered sort of what it was like to sort of be around him sort of during filming and during that sort of that particularly hard time in his life, really.
It was 10 days I'll never forget. We drove from eastern Nebraska. I don't know if you guys know geography of the United States, but Nebraska, from the western part all the way to Texas. And on the way he did 2 shows, and we went to see his daughter, which was very emotional.
I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah. It was, he would tell stories and stories and stories and stories, and they were all tragic.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the 10th day, he would be like, I had a cousin here who got electrocuted in the swimming pool, died electrocuted in the swimming pool. And I finally couldn't, after 10 days of listening to stories like this, I said, Terry, my mom grew up in the Holocaust in Germany, and she has better stories of her youth than you did.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
he was a very interesting guy.
Yeah. No, he certainly went through a lot, as you say.
Yeah, it's crazy. People always talk about his demons with like substance abuse and stuff, but his whole life and childhood was such a tough but fascinating watch. Like,
yeah, his mother is actually in the film. She wouldn't be on camera,
right?
And, her back's it's a cutaway, and we're in a luncheonette, and she's behind the counter. But meeting his father was exactly how would happen is in the movie. The father just went to break rocks. I don't know what for.
Yeah.
And they're just sitting down there, and they didn't talk to one another. And
it's almost like he saw him as an extra kind of laborers instead of obviously his son to talk to. It was heartbreaking. I think obviously is there's the thing with his father, but then also obviously, as you said, his daughter was super emotional as well. I think
I was very glad to see in the later on documentaries on Jake that his daughter and him are come a little closer, because she was very hurt.
Yeah, you can see. It's kind of, it's a shame he's had to go through all that, but it's at the same time to see where he is now. It's it's a blessing that he's obviously still here, and he's mended a lot of them bridges. But during the documentary, that relationship with his daughter, do you think it drew a lot of similarities with Mickey Rourke's character in The Wrestler? Is that something that anyone's ever mentioned to you before?
Well, I think Mickey Rourke is a character in there. We came first, so. It was very interesting. I liked the Wrestler a lot. I thought it was very good.
Oh yeah.
But when Dan Aronofsky, they asked him about the comparisons between that and Beyond the Mat, he said he never saw Beyond the Mat. And on 4 separate occasions, his office called me if I can give him Jake's phone number. So I'm going, I don't know that he didn't see Beyond the Mat.
Yeah.
But if you're doing a story about a wrestler, his relationship with his kids are part of it. And so I thought it was very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, certainly one of the things that struck us about that film, like you say, is like, I'm very surprised that he says he hasn't seen it, because you can see that he potentially sort of took a lot from that relationship as inspiration, if nothing else.
Some camera shots that are exactly but
Yeah. So obviously we've mentioned Mick Foley a couple of times throughout, obviously featured in the documentary as well, and you've mentioned that that you and him had the most in common, I suppose. Is he someone that you still keep in touch with today?
Yeah, I just saw Mick about 2 months ago. He was in Southern California. He does stand-up comedy.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's all about, I remember when he told me he wanted to do stand-up comedy, and he said, but I'm not going to do anything about wrestling. But then he realized all people cared about was when he talked about wrestling.
Yeah, way too iconic.
So, and it's a very funny show, and I've seen he's done about, like every comedian every year or two comes out with a totally new show, totally new material.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah. He definitely likes his extracurricular activities. Best-selling author. He was Santa Claus for a bit. Now he's doing stand-up. He's a busy man. What was it like? Obviously, we saw, the heartbreaking scenes with little Noel and Dewey after, the I Quit match with The Rock and things like that. And you got to see Mick watching that back. Was that, how? Yeah. Well, what was that like to see Mick kind of react that way and have that realization?
Well, I edited the film. With an editor, Jeff Warner, did a great job editing it. And I didn't want to end with the match in the Royal Rumble match. I didn't want that to be the last image, because I've been around Mick a lot, and Mick's an excellent father. He's an excellent father, but he made a mistake having his kids be that close and watching it.
Yeah.
But he's even the most excellent fathers can make mistakes. So I wanted Mick, because Mick would go, I'd say, Mick said, how's it look? I go, it doesn't look good at the end. And he said, could I see it? And you film me seeing it? I go, yeah, that's what I want to do. So I went down and showed it to him. And I had a PA take the kids out for his kids out for ice cream and stuff like that. And he was, what you see in the film was his reaction.
Yeah. It's you know what, I like the way you sort of put that about being an excellent father, because I do think, like, and again, something that me and Carl talked about before, that it's a very human moment. Like I never look at it like he was a bad father by any means. It's a very human moment, like you say. It's a mistake in a lot of ways, like you say. And obviously, being a father myself, I almost felt the same way, if you know what I mean. Like as almost as upset as he was, because you sort of related to your own kids and think, oh God, I'd hate to be in that situation. And I think it not that it comes across well in it, but it to me, it's just it humanizes him a lot in that documentary,
Yeah, it was a tough scene to edit because his son also lost it, not just his daughter. And it just became, I didn't want it to be exploitive.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And it was tough seeing, tough to know where the line was, where it was becoming exploitive.
Yeah.
And I was constantly cutting back. And now his children are adults, when I meet them, I'm always like, I'm the man who made you, showed you crying. And now his kids are like 27 years old or something, 28 years old.
Yeah. And clearly very well adjusted adults as well, so it didn't harm them that much. It seems.
No, they're fine.
Yeah,
they're fine.
So, I mean, my next question may be a hard one to answer, because obviously it's your documentary, and it's sort of your baby, if you will. But do you have any sort of particular favorite or even least favorite memories from the making of the documentary?
It's my favorite project I've ever done.
Yeah.
And I just remember, laughing all the time at the end of the days and being exhausted, but because I couldn't believe I'm making this movie.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe, as a wrestling fan, I got a chance to live my childhood dreams and not be a wrestler, but be involved with a wrestler.
Yeah.
And there were no low moments. There were moments with getting Vince to sign the release thing.
Yeah.
That just took a long time. But there wasn't any low moment involved with that. It was just, I would meet with him every 4 months and he would go, now what's this documentary about? And I was like, it's the same documentary I talked about 4 months ago. It hasn't changed. No, it was the most satisfying experience, even in the release when there was everything that happened between me and Vince, the disagreements, and him trying to he offered to buy the film out from Universal, and then he would have probably buried it. Even the back and forth between us, I felt like I was in a wrestling feud, but it was totally real. But I felt like it was just like I'd seen this play out on TV so many times, and I was now part of it. It was wild. Still blows my mind.
Just try to remind yourself not to hit him with a few stunners. Yeah, no, you can absolutely see it was an absolute passion project, and it came through, and obviously how crisp and what a fantastic film it is. Have you ever thought about making a sequel? Do you think it would work today?
I think it would work today. I avoided making a sequel because I liked the first film a lot, and I didn't think a sequel could live up to it. And I thought wrestling fans are ripped off all the time, and I don't want to be someone else to rip them off. Now that I'm so removed from it, there's a film. I would maybe do a film which would portray the artistic side of wrestling, because I think, there's a very much, especially today, with the performers. I mean, they're such tremendous artists, and so many good storytellers, and
it's like the first one kind of explored the people behind the craft, but the second one could be just exploring the craft and what it takes to do that.
Yeah,
fascinating.
Yeah. So while we're talking about sequels, just a quick mention to obviously we quite recently had the sequel to Coming to America, which came out last year. So what was it like to revisit that sort of side of your writing?
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah,
it was fun. The first thing David Sheffield, my partner, and I wrote was the barbershop scenes again.
Yeah.
And it was like the scene, and we were amazingly, we just picked it up, and it was just like we riffed for about an hour and a half, just as those guys. So it was like it was fun.
Yeah, you could see it. You could just tell the magic of the original was still there in the sequel as well. Are you working on anything else at the moment? Any other projects that?
No, I'm a professor. I'm a professor now.
Oh, okay.
I teach writing at Chapman University.
Oh, wow.
In Orange, California, and which I find very fulfilling. And I'm slowed down also because I have Parkinson's. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's about 8 years ago. So going out on the road and making a film like Beyond and that would tire me out too much. I'm not as young as I used to be. I'm in the best shape I've ever been in, because the best, there's no cure for Parkinson's, but the best thing is exercise.
Right. Yeah.
And so I keep saying I would never do anything on wrestling again, but I changed my mind. I still don't go through the hassle of raising money again.
No, that's truly like the wrestling business, isn't it? You can never say never.
Never say no. Never say no. And all this stuff that they were worried I was going to reveal too much, and I was careful. I told them I wasn't going to reveal. I wasn't going to. And now I see what documentaries they do, and they reveal everything.
Yeah. I think I think they're a lot less sort of worried about that now. There was a time when it was a very protected thing. You know, you
Right.
can't sort of you can't lift the veil too much, and I think that seems to have, certainly in recent years, they don't seem to be as worried about people being aware that it's, you know, it's an act in a way.
What's the British wrestling scene like?
It's good, you know, it's
yeah.
growing. Like, obviously it's not as big as it was back in the day when you had like Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks and stuff, but we've got a couple of like 3 or 4 promotions that are really starting to bring it back. And obviously we had NXT UK for a little bit. That's just been kind of parked now while they do NXT Europe. But it's yeah, I think it's making a bit of a resurgence, to be fair.
Yeah, I think wrestling all around us, but
Yeah.
it's got quite a respectable indie scene. I mean, obviously there's nothing sort of comparable to the size of the likes of WWE or even AEW, but there's plenty of good indie options there, really.
What do you guys think of the AEW?
It's a fascinating one. I think when it first started, I was really into it because I think it had a really good blend, and I think maybe they've gone a bit too sports heavy with it, because I'm fascinated with the story and the characters and the journey that the wrestlers take to get to the pay-per-view, for example. Don't get me wrong, they put on fantastic matches, but I wish they just had a little bit more story at times.
Yeah. I like it, but there are too many belts. I mean, everybody has a championship belt.
Yeah.
The Mid-Atlantic States belt, what is this?
Yeah.
No, you're not wrong.
The work rate is great, but
yeah,
I wish.
And it's hard as well because there's so much wrestling out there, and it's like they bring in fantastic talent from the likes of Ring of Honor and other companies and stuff, but because you can't watch everything, you kind of getting introduced to these people every week, and it's hard to kind of you know, keep.
And then people disappear for weeks.
Yeah.
There's certainly one of the recent sort of issues, I suppose, Carl and I have had is with like certain pay-per-views, like we're only knowing like 50% of the talent, because we, like, as Carl said, we follow WWE, we follow AEW, but it's hard to watch the likes of you know, Ring of Honor, New Japan. You know, you'd be watching wrestling all day with all the options that are out there. So it is sometimes it's hard to sort of keep up with who this person is and what the story is, you know.
And also their pay-per-views are too long.
It's like 15, 20 matches.
WWE's learned that 3 hours is about it.
Yeah.
How do you how do you find the product now since Triple H has kind of took over? Because I think, you know, I don't want to use the word stale, but there were times when it was not as fun to watch, and I think the last couple of weeks and stuff, it seems to have stepped up a little bit.
I think it's doing a wonderful job.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. So, I mean, I suppose the last thing we have to ask you question-wise is something we always like to do is to sort of ask how people can keep up to date with what you're up to and what you've got going on, like in terms of social medias and that sort of thing.
I'm on Facebook, but I don't do most social media.
No, I can understand that,
yeah. That's fair. Yeah, honestly.
Myself. This is about the first interview I've done in about 5 or 6 years. And it was just you guys writing me, and I said, it was just like, well, why not? Let's do it. You know.
We might. I mean, I'm being genuine when I say I absolutely love Beyond the Mat. It's one of my favorite movies ever, not even wrestling related. So it's an absolute honor to speak to you and
it truly is.
Take the mind of somebody who 11-year-old me was just like, who made this film? It's so good. So genuinely appreciate it.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. Thank you for the kind words about the film and having me on.